participated in this bipartisan event and shared their ideas. I thank the gentleman for joining me and for his help in facilitating this noteworthy cause, and I look forward to working with him to continue to make Congress a more transparent and accessible institution for the people who have sent us here. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank the gentleman for his comments and his leadership on the hackathon event that occurred yesterday. He and I both had the opportunity to address a large number, over 250, I think, individuals who were there, who will, in fact, bring their expertise, their technical knowledge to bear on what the gentleman referenced as making our institution more accessible and transparent to our citizens. We all believe, I think, that doing that will make the products that we produce better and make citizens better able to make judgments on the work that we do. So I want to thank the gentleman and his staff for their leadership on this effort. We were glad to join in that. Mr. Speaker, I understand that the unemployment insurance, the payroll tax issue, which will continue to give middle-class tax cuts to those who need it most, the unemployment, which will keep people millions of people from losing their unemployment, as well as the physician adjustment, are scheduled next week. Now, it's my understanding that bill has not been filed yet, but can the gentleman tell me when he believes that bill will be filed?
Mr. Speaker, I'd respond to the gentleman by saying that we are still in discussion about that bill and in drafting, and we do intend to abide by our necessary 3-day notice period so that all sides and all members, as well as the public, can enjoy their right to know what will be in that legislation. But the gentleman is correct. We do expect that bill on the floor next week. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman for that comment. I have had discussions with the gentleman and with Mr. McCarthy in particular, and also briefly with the Speaker, that we are certainly prepared to participate in discussions leading towards a successful passage of those 3 pieces of legislation, particularly the unemployment insurance and the payroll tax extension, which we believe are critical before we end this year. So we're pleased to see that legislation moving forward. But I will tell my friend that I would be pleased to participate in discussions with him so that we can assure that that bill will in fact pass, and hopefully pass in a bipartisan fashion. I want to tell the gentleman that I'm a little bit concerned, and I want to ask him whether this principle will be followed. I think I used this quote last week, but it bears repeating. Speaker Boehner said, "We will end the practice of packaging unpopular bills with must-pass legislation to circumvent the will of the American people. Instead, we'll advance major legislation one issue at a time." That was in the Republican pledge as well, and the Speaker has reiterated that at the beginning of this session. Now, I'm concerned because Republican Study Committee Chairman Jim Jordan of Ohio is quoted in the Washington Post as saying the following, quote, "The fact the President doesn't like it," the "it" referring to the Keystone Pipeline provision, which we understand is under discussion. I'm glad to hear those discussions have not concluded. But he's again quoted, "The fact that the President doesn't like it makes me like it even more," said the GOP leadership proposal as he left Thursday morning's closed-door meeting. I will say to my friend that we are at the end of the session. We are hopeful, as I have said, and as we have demonstrated on the 2 CRs and the debt extension and on the minibus appropriation bill that we passed, that we are prepared to respond in a bipartisan fashion to assist in passing must-pass legislation, and would hope very much that we don't put controversial items in that. The President has clearly enunciated that he will veto a bill that has the Keystone Pipeline. And I will say, as my friend clearly knows, there is bipartisan concern. As a matter of fact, the governor of Nebraska, a Republican, and the Republican legislature, which although nominally nonpartisan, as the gentleman knows, is 2/3 Republican, 1/3 Democrat, have all voted to delay this project because of their concern about the aquifer and the impact that the Keystone Pipeline, as currently platted, will have in reference to the aquifer, so that there is a bipartisan concern. As the gentleman knows, as a result of Nebraska's passing legislation, which said they wanted to do a study on the aquifer and alternative siting of the Keystone pipeline course, that study would take them 5 to 6 to 7 months. As a result, the President indicated they would, in giving time to the Nebraska governor and the Nebraska legislature, again Republican organs, to look at that, has given them additional time and said he won't act until the beginning of 2013. I asked the gentleman, does he believe that provision? I understand what Mr. Jordan says. It may be a nice political gesture, but I would hope that that would not be the kind of provision that would be included in the legislation, whether it's individually bills or a comprehensive bill, including those 3 items that hopefully we can pass in a bipartisan fashion. And I yield to my friend.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman. I understand the point he is trying to make. I would just say...
Will the gentleman yield back?
Yeah.
I thought I did make the point. I yield back.
Well, you may have made the point. Maybe, Mr. Speaker, what I'm trying to say is that I disagree with the gentleman that if the provisions dealing with the Keystone Pipeline are in the measure that makes it to the floor, that we shouldn't join together and do what was done in the past, and that is demonstrate a strong bipartisan vote in support of that project, because as the gentleman knows, organized labor in this country is very supportive of that bill, of that provision. It means immediate jobs. The President continues to say he is for creating jobs, doing all we can to get America back to work. This is a provision that allows for that. We also have seen, Mr. Speaker, in response to the gentleman's concerns about Nebraska and the issues raised by its governor as well as its state legislature, I believe and am told that there have been many discussions in which an alternative route has been determined, and there is agreement on that to allow for the proceeding of the construction of the pipeline. Again, knowing that there is strong bipartisan support for the project, knowing that labor is in support of it, knowing that it puts people back to work immediately, it would seem to me that this is a consistent provision to go along with making sure that we deal with the unemployment situation in this country through an extension of the UI provisions with hopefully some reforms, as well as the extension of the payroll tax holiday. As you know, the gentleman knows, our side is concerned. We don't want taxes to go up on anybody, especially in an economy like this. But again, I hope the gentleman can consider joining us in terms of helping promote an environment for job creation. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comment. I will say this, though. It seems inconsistent when the President of the United States yesterday said he would veto such a provision, that we would include it in legislation that is must pass. By the way, the unemployment insurance, economists tell us, will provide for 100 times as many jobs. So therefore, we're for that. Some 500,000 jobs may be affected by extending the unemployment insurance. In addition to that, I tell my friend, the President has offered a jobs bill. I know that you're concerned about jobs. The pipeline bill, in and of itself, is about 5,000 to 6,000 jobs over the lifetime of the pipeline. The jobs bill, economists tell us, is 1 million jobs, or 200 times as many jobs. Notwithstanding that, very frankly, that has been languishing since September and not brought to this floor. So it seems to me that if we are really interested, and I think you are, on extending the unemployment insurance and providing for continued tax cut for middle-income Americans, and for providing for the payment of docs who are serving Medicare patients, that we not include in that bill an item that apparently is popular on your side just because the President doesn't like it, according to Mr. Jordan. I think that's not the way we ought to be operating. the last 7 days of the session, or 5 days, 6 days, 7, assuming we went through Sunday. We shouldn't be doing that, I suggest respectfully to my friend, the Majority Leader, because it will simply put us back into the situation the American public doesn't want us in, and that's confronting one another, playing chicken with one another, bringing us to the precipice of defeat and lack of success. Public doesn't want us there. We shouldn't want us there. And I would urge the gentleman not to include items, as I have urged you with respect to the appropriation bills that also must be passed. That's not in this list, but you did mention it, of course, in the announcement with Mr. Rogers and Mr. Dix have been working hard, and others have been working hard to get our appropriations bills done. We have urged that we not put controversial items in that, and we showed our good faith on that representation when we passed the minibus, and 165 Democrats joined 135 Republicans to pass that legislation. So again, I would urge the gentleman to if he feels strongly about that, and I know that he said labor is for that bill. Labor is for that bill. I think I'm for that bill. I want the gentleman to know. So this does not come from my particular opposition to this bill. I am concerned about the alignment and the aquifer. I think that's a legitimate concern, but I think that that oil is going to be drilled no matter what we do. It seems to me that it's better for us to have it than for others to have it and have that availability. But having said that, gratuitously putting it into a bill that the President has already said, I don't agree with that, is simply playing chicken on legislation that's very important. If the gentleman wants to comment on that, I'd be glad to yield to him.
I just said to the gentleman, I've already responded to the notion of issues arising in Nebraska that I'm told have been resolved. So the issue that he is concerned about has apparently been resolved. I would say to the gentleman, there are 47 members on his side of the aisle, including 5 ranking members of committees that have supported the measure allowing for the construction proceeding on the Keystone Pipeline. There is no gratuitous move here. It's an attempt to try and bring the two sides together on the most important issue, which is creating jobs. This is a provision that I believe has been demonstrated has support on both sides of the aisle. And again, Mr. Speaker, I would hope the gentleman could refrain from trying to say and impute motives here. We're trying to work in a fashion, open, transparent, together, so that we don't come to any kind of end that doesn't produce a result for the people. That's it. So again, I appreciate the gentleman's sentiments.
I thank the gentleman. I was quoting, not imputing. Mr. Jordan's comments seem to be pretty clear. I know the gentleman will conclude, but before we conclude, the Schock Act, Tim Walz had a bill that was ready for markup in the committee. We understand that was pulled. As you know, that bill has 220 co-sponsors and is a bipartisan sponsorship. It simply says that members should not use inside information to trade with information the general public may not have about legislation that may or may not be reported or passed to the floor. I understand that was pulled. I think that was unfortunate. Can the gentleman tell me what the status of that piece of legislation is?
Well, sure. Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. Thank the gentleman. First of all, the issue of insider trading is something that we abhor as well. Do not tolerate and believe that all members of Congress should fall under the same laws that apply to anyone, and want to make sure that is the case if it is not. You know, transparency is the key, because the public needs to know what their members are doing, and we intend to take this issue, make sure that concerns that have been raised by members on both sides of the aisle are being vetted, This is an issue of extreme import for the confidence of the public towards this institution. We intend to do so in a deliberate manner. There were issues raised, again, by members on both sides of the aisle about this bill not being brought up in a vetted way. There are many other chairmen who have jurisdiction in this matter who need to be involved in this with the full vetting, and we intend to do that. And I do hope the gentleman will work with us in doing so, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and as he knows, Congressman Walz has been working hard on this, and I know that he will be very inclined to work with you and with the committees of jurisdiction, and I will certainly be able to work with you as well on this issue, because as I say, Congressman Walz has worked very hard on this. I think all of us agree, as you just indicated, that no member of Congress ought to be using insider information to trade in the stock market to disadvantage, obviously, others who are trading in the stock market. So I thank the gentleman for his comment, look forward to working with him, and again, in closing, hope that we can reach bipartisan agreement on so many major pieces of legislation that we need to pass prior to leaving this. I will tell the gentleman that, and I hope his side agrees, my side will not want to adjourn, nor will it support adjournment until such time as we act on the unemployment insurance and the middle-class tax cuts. And I appreciate the gentleman's. Does the gentleman? No. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 11 a.m. tomorrow, and further, when the House adjourns on that day, it adjourned to meet at noon on Monday, December 12, 2011, for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection. The Chair is prepared to entertain 1 minute speeches. The gentlewoman from Nevada is recognized.
I rise to address the House for 1 moment and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of Nevada's middle-class families. Because of the economic downturn, thousands of Nevadans are struggling to find a job, pay their rent, and put food on their families' tables. They cannot afford a tax increase. However, Washington gridlock is threatening just that, a massive tax increase on middle-class families. Why? Because some Washington Republicans refuse to roll back special tax breaks for Wall Street millionaires in order to pay for a middle-class tax cut for 1.2 million Nevadans. That's just not right. So my message today is this: no holiday vacation for Congress without extending the middle-class tax cut. We cannot go home while Nevada families are hurting and desperate for this extension of their payroll tax cuts. However, that's going to require Washington Republicans to stop protecting Wall Street millionaires and stop putting Nevada's families first. The only fair way to achieve this is to roll back special tax breaks for Wall Street millionaires, not slash Medicare benefits, not lay off thousands of people. It's time to stop putting Wall Street first and before Main Street. Washington ought not go on vacation until we take care of this problem. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Are there further 1-minute requests? Plays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Davis of Illinois for today, Mr. Jackson of Illinois for today, and Mr. Pastor of Arizona for Monday, December 12, and until 4 p.m. on Tuesday, December 13th.
Without objection, the requests are granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's great to get a chance to come back down to the floor to visit with my colleagues and talk about an issue that I've been raising 7 or 8 weeks in a row. This I'll have a little more extended time to go over what has transpired over the past 6 to 7 months, and that's that this country really needs to address this high-level nuclear waste problem in this country. And I'm glad to be joined with some of my colleagues who I'll yield to in a couple minutes. But just to start in a synopsis, based upon the areas of the countries that we, parts of the country that we visited, for us to move past the log jam that's in the other body, we have to find 60 senators who will vote to move forward what we know is federal law. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982 recognized and determined that Yucca Mountain would be the national repository for high-level nuclear waste. So I think a lot of folks would say, well, so if it's the law, why aren't we there? Well, the reason we're not there now is because the majority leader of the Senate has blocked it along with the President of the United States. And so this time is being spent to help educate the American public, Mr. Speaker, on where is the high-level nuclear waste, what communities, what states are affected, and what senators should be held somewhat accountable for the positions they take as far as high-level nuclear waste. So on the chart to the my far left, throughout this last half a year, we've got, we need 60 votes. We've got at least 27 senators who we know already support this based upon votes or public statements. We have 8 that really have not had a chance to address this by a vote or haven't made a public statement on it yet. And we have 7 nays, or 7 no votes. So with that, just because I appreciate my colleagues taking time out, I'd like to first yield to my colleague from the state of Illinois, no disrespect to my colleague from the state of Georgia, to go into a discussion about one of the areas that we addressed. One of the first sites we talked about, I figured I better come forward and talk about my own state. If I'm going to talk about other states, I better talk about the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois is 50% of our electricity is generated by nuclear power. We're one of the biggest nuclear power states in the country. We picked a facility that's actually closed, which is the Zion power plant. And with that, I yield to my colleague, Mr. Dole, to kind of talk about Zion, the state of Illinois, and its location.
Well, I want to thank the gentleman for yielding and certainly for taking this issue up, which I think is so very, very critical, not only for just the state of Illinois, but for facilities all across the country, as we look at how we can best store the used material from the nuclear facilities. So the spent fuel rods, more specifically. If you'll notice here in Zion, which is just north of the district, but certainly affects the district just north of Chicago in the 10th district where I represent, it's right on the shores of Lake Michigan. The Great Lakes, 95% of all fresh surface water in the United States are from the Great Lakes. And when we look at the amount of drinking water that the state of Illinois uses, it's an enormous percentage that are coming from the Great Lakes. And yet in our infinite wisdom, we've decided that we want to store the fuel rods just a sheer several hundred feet from the shores of Lake Michigan, 5 feet above the water table. And if we take a look at Yucca Mountain, the reason why Yucca Mountain was chosen was Yucca Mountain is uniquely suited as the premier place. If we were to store any place spent fuel rods, this would be the ideal location. 1,000 feet below the ground, 1,000 feet above the water table. A very dry, arid environment. And correct me if I'm wrong, where's the nearest inhabitants of Yucca Mountain? Is it 100 miles?
Well, the city of Las Vegas, which is the major metropolitan area, is 100 miles from Yucca Mountain. What people have a hard time understanding about the nuclear test area, this is where the nuclear test site was. Federal government owns numerous parcels of land around Yucca Mountain. The communities right outside the reservation, and I think the whole test site area is like the size of New Hampshire to the like. But the communities, what's interesting about this debate, the communities right outside the gate are fully supportive of Yucca Mountain being the repository for high-level nuclear waste in the state of. And why do I know that? Because I visited them. I've been in their communities. I went to the community center. They welcomed me, and we talked about how this was important for the country and their local communities.
This is absolutely critical for the country. And we look at just the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois has got 13 commercial reactors at 7 sites across the state of Illinois. Our neighbors to the north have 3 commercial reactors operating on 2 different sites, both of those on Lake Michigan. And so when we look at the 8.5 million people that rely on the drinking water, much less the recreation, the fishing, all the different forms of commerce that happen on our Great Lakes, this is something that I think is critical. The senators from both the state of Illinois and the state of Wisconsin have all been in favor of trying to utilize this facility out at Yucca Mountain, and it just makes sense. Why do we want to store, Mr. Speaker, why would we want to store over 1,000 metric tons of nuclear waste hundreds of feet away from the greatest source of fresh surface water in our nation? It is indeed the jewel of our ecosystem. This is something that we need to protect, something that we need to have a long-term vision for. And yet what we don't need to do is have scattered sites all across our country of nuclear waste that has a greater potential for disasters to happen. They're being stored right now in casks that are about 5 feet above the groundwater, above the water table, and what we'd like to do is take it 1,000 feet above the water table, 1,000 feet below ground. This is something that absolutely makes perfect sense, and I welcome the gentleman's colloquy in terms of talking about not only this site, and I thank you for bringing it up on week after week, trying to make sure that we try to get through to our colleagues on the other side of the building to make sure they can move this common sense piece of legislation forward. How much have we spent already at Yucca Mountain? I think it's in the $14 billion range.
My colleague's correct. We've already spent about $14.5 billion in the research, the development, the exploration, testing, a lot of money, time, effort, and some of our greatest minds have been involved. But, you know, I don't really think you have to be one of the greatest minds. I mean, the point I always say is common sense says in the desert underneath a mountain. Isn't that where you would want high-level nuclear waste versus right off the shore of Lake Michigan?
It seems certainly like common sense to me, and I certainly applaud the gentleman's efforts. And thank you for giving me the time. And I just want to make sure that not only this isn't just important for the folks in the state of Illinois and the folks in Wisconsin and the people in Michigan that are surrounding the Great Lakes, and specifically Lake Michigan. It's all the Great Lakes, and it's not just in Illinois. There are nuclear power facilities all across the country. We need to have a safe, secure way to be able to store these spent fuel rods, and I think Yucca Mountain has been proven to be the place to do it, and I think we should move forward on it.
Before the gentleman yields, can you tell me the disposition of Zion Power Plant? What's going on there right now?
The Zion Power Plant has actually been decommissioned at this point in time. So right now they are putting it in mothballs. They are taking the spent fuel rods. They're in casks. They are being transported into a location that's on the site. It's just literally a few hundred feet away from the beaches there, and probably about 20 to 30 miles north of the city of Chicago. This is not the place that we want to be storing spent fuel rods, and so Zion, was a great source of electricity for the people around the area, and has been decommissioned over the last 2 years. So it is now sitting idle, and they're trying to go through the process of dismantling it.
Yeah, and I think I briefly tried to show this article from the Salt Lake Tribune dated December 8th, which talks about some of the reactor parts who are going to go out to Utah. But it's what the article ends up saying is the site will not, however, take the Illinois plant's used fuel rods. The United States currently has no site to dispose of spent fuel from commercial reactors, a form of high-level nuclear waste. So if we don't have a location, where is that high-level nuclear waste, the spent fuel, going to remain?
It's going to remain, seriously, right in the middle of a high population area, hundreds of feet away from the jewel of our ecosystem in the Great Lakes and Lake Michigan. It's the wrong place for it to be. Common sense would say, let's move it out to a place, a location just like Yucca Mountain. $14 billion of research and dollars have gone into the site. Let's put it 1,000 feet below the ground, 1,000 feet above the water table in an arid environment. It's absolutely perfect for it. It's something that we should move forward on. It's in the best interest and the safety of the American public to do something along these lines.
And I'm told that Zion is, what, 40 miles from downtown Chicago?
40 miles from downtown Chicago, which obviously, so we're talking in the greater Chicago area, you probably have about 6.5 to 7 million people. Certainly not what we want to have in terms of these nuclear.
And the reason why this is important, unfortunately, is because of Fukushima Daiichi in Japan, which is a great tragedy. A lot of people think about the containment issue, which has always been the fear. Part of the Fukushima Daiichi problem was the spent fuel in the pools, which might be a bigger environmental disaster based upon things that cannot be planned. That's why we continue to push this. I appreciate my colleague coming down.
And I thank the gentleman for allowing me to have some time with you today, and again for talking about this very important issue.
And now I'm going to turn and join my colleague from Georgia, who also serves with me on the Energy and Commerce Committee. We have jurisdiction over this. My subcommittee is the Environment and the Economy. I deal with a lot of the waste disposal issues, nuclear waste being one of those. When my colleague has followed this issue as long as I have, and last time I came to the floor, I mentioned a couple facilities in Georgia, but the one that I have highlighted is, if it's here, if not, we're going to get it up to my colleague, is Savannah River. And as I finish, I'll get it up to my colleague, but the point we're trying to make today is here you have Yucca Mountain, which is in a desert and a mountain. And then you have nuclear waste all over this country. Look at this one, Savannah River, right next to the Savannah River. At Yucca Mountain, we have no nuclear waste on site. At Savannah River, there's 6,300 canisters of waste on site. The waste would be stored, as my colleague Bob Dole said, 1,000 feet underground, where at Savannah River it's stored right below the ground. At Yucca Mountain, 1,000 feet above the water table. At Savannah River, it would be 0 to 160 feet above the water table. The waste at Yucca Mountain is 100 miles from the Colorado River. Well, you can see, adjacent to the Savannah River. So I appreciate my colleague, Congressman Gingrich, joining me, and I'd like to yield to him to go into the colloquy.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to join my colleague from Illinois, the Subcommittee Chairman on Energy and Commerce of the Environment and Economy Subcommittee on this very important subject. Our colleagues from Illinois specifically point out the existing situation in their state in regard to these nuclear reactor sites in Illinois and what they do with spent nuclear fuel. The poster that the gentleman has presented in regard to my great state and my neighboring state of South Carolina in regard to what we're faced with is equally as telling. I think it might be instructive, Mr. Speaker, if I go back, take a walk down memory lane just a little bit in regard to my background. When I was growing up in North Augusta, South Carolina, this central Savannah River area, which includes the southern part, if you will, or the western part of South Carolina and the eastern part of Georgia, are separated by the Savannah River. And there was a facility built on the South Carolina side in a town called Ellington, South Carolina, back in 1950. I hate to tell my age, but I was 7 or 8 at the time. And, Mr. Speaker, my parents owned a little motel on the river. They very insightfully named the mom-and-pop 25-unit motel the Riviera Motel. And during the construction of this nuclear plant, there were 50,000 construction workers involved in that facility, constructing that facility for 3 years. And I can't tell you how happy my parents were every evening when the sun went down to turn on that no vacancy sign at the Riviera Motel, because all of these workers stayed with us. We didn't get rich. They were only paying $8 a night. But it's just to point out the importance of jobs in the nuclear industry and the capability of expanding our employment sector in this particular lane of energy. This country right now, today, I'm told that we produce about 20% of our electricity from nuclear power. In the state of Georgia, it's 24%. Not much higher. We have 2 sites, 4 reactors. We're in the process of adding 2 more right on the Savannah River, as the gentleman from Illinois points out, at Plant Vogtle, and hopefully we'll get that done. But the problem which the gentleman is bringing before all of our colleagues and hopefully a lot of other folks that are viewing or listening is, why is it for the last 30 years we have had no new nuclear sites? We've literally had a moratorium, and you have about 103 across the country, those in Illinois, those in Georgia. And what are they doing with this spent nuclear fuel? It is either shallow underground in pool tanks, not very much above the water table, or even worse, above ground in these concrete and steel containers. Talk about a risk of terrorism, of an attack in the radiation release. So the gentleman is so generous to ask me to join in this colloquy about the issue. I'm looking forward to continuing as I yield back to him to discuss the real problem here, what to do with that spent fuel. And I yield back to my colleague.
Again, I appreciate you joining me today. I want to quote from a Chicago Tribune editorial of March 19th, and I'll just do 3 short paragraphs. Here's why that is potentially a bigger problem than a meltdown. In the Japanese reactors, as in many U.S. reactors, the spent fuel is housed in large water-filled pools in the reactor building, but outside the concrete and steel fortress that surrounds the reactor core. If the core melts down, any radiation release is likely to be bottled up by the containment vessel. Not so for the spent fuel pools, which often contain far more radioactive material than in the reactor. If the water that keeps those rods cool drains or boils away, the used fuel can catch fire. Result: a dangerous plume of extremely high radioactivity spewed into the air. Obvious question: why do nuclear plants store spent fuel that way? Obvious answer: in the U.S., Yucca Mountain isn't opened. In the 1980s, the federal government launched plans to ship nuclear waste to a storage layer carved into the mountain in Nevada and let it slowly and harmlessly decay. So our discussion here is about there are benefits of nuclear power, and if you're a climate change person and you don't want carbon dioxide and you still want a lot of electricity for us to use in our new technology, you have to have a generator. But in this case, it's the used fuel not properly, well, I shouldn't say, it is properly stored, but it would be better stored under a single repository in the desert underneath a mountain for all the reasons. You're talking about 4 reactors right now in Georgia, 2 more coming online. That's 6. Illinois has 11. There are over 104 across this whole country. And of course, we spent our time talking about the used nuclear fuel from the industry. But when I started this debate about what do we do with high-level nuclear waste, I started with a DOE facility that goes back to the World War II and the development of the nuclear bomb and the Fat Man bomb, which was built at Hanford, Washington. And all that waste going all the way back to World War II is in Hanford. Yeah. And there are 53 million gallons of nuclear waste on site, buried right off the surface of the ground in tanks that are 750,000 to 1 million gallons each. Only about 40 of them, there's over 100, only about 40 of them are double line. That means the rest are not. Some are leaking.
If the gentleman would yield.
I would yield.
And the question of who is responsible in Hanford or in Barnwell, South Carolina, or New Ellington to guard and protect. A tremendous burden on the states, but even if the Department of Homeland Security, maybe they do some of the oversight and protection of these sites, but 103 different sites across the country, how much simpler, how much safer, how much cheaper if they had one site to protect, that being 100 miles from Las Vegas at Yucca Mountain?
And continuing to speak on this issue of just looking at it to kind of get away from just the nuclear generating profit sector to address our responsibility as stewards of a program that was developed to stop World War II and then eventually remedy these environments that have environmental impact. Yucca Mountain, the waste storage plan for Hanford, and I just toured it this year, the plan to gather up the deliquefy, reprocess, put them in these canisters is designed to go to one location. You know what that location is? That location is Yucca Mountain. So our failure to move forward, or our failure, actually, the other chamber's failure, the leader of the Senate's failure, the President of the United States' failure, just tells Washington State what? Guess what? You've got this high-level nuclear waste that's leaking, that's close to the Columbia River, and just deal with it. Just deal with it. And I find that unacceptable after, as my colleague from Illinois said, $14.5 billion we spent to prepare this site at Yucca Mountain, only to have it stop for political purposes.
Well, you know, and the gentleman will yield to me again, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this, because what year did we commission a group to study, and there were a number of potential sites for permanent storage from all these 103 facilities, one unified central site. And I'm relatively sure the gentleman could correct me if I'm wrong, but it was at least a 5-year process before it was settled in 1987, and Congress at that time designated Yucca Mountain as the sole site for a permanent high-level nuclear waste repository after years of contentious applications. So this is set in law, is it not? And I'll yield back to the gentleman.
The Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982 established Yucca Mountain as the national repository for high-level nuclear waste. And again, for the educational purposes, Mr. Speaker, that is spent fuel. Sometimes it's spent nuclear waste from our Department of Defense, now controlled by the Department of Energy sites like Hanford. Our argument is, let's consolidate this waste safely, securely, at one location so that, as my colleague from Georgia says, we can more safely, I think effectively, I think efficiently, I think cost-effectively manage, protect, and eventually try to remediate some of the damage that's been done over decades because of this high-level nuclear waste being located all over the country.
The gentleman will yield back to me for a comment or two. I have had the opportunity as a member of Congress, and in particular as a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Speaker, to travel to France and Scandinavia recently to look at their nuclear facility, but in particular their ability to reprocess in France and their ability to store in Scandinavia. We have described a little bit about the physiognomy, if you will, of the Yucca Mountain area, the nuclear test site in that arid desert of northern Nevada. And they have, in Scandinavia, have developed a laboratory. I think they call it the CLAD. But it is literally 1,400 meters below ground in bedrock. And you can drive 18-wheel trucks down something like 2 miles deep in the ground where their spent nuclear fuel is stored. And that's the model, and that's really what we are looking at and planning for at Yucca Mountain. Nothing could be safer in regard to storage. And the other thing is, while we were in France, we looked at a facility where they take that spent fuel, Mr. Speaker, and they reprocess it. So at some point in the future, if we decide and we have the technology to do that, that source of spent nuclear fuel that's stored in Yucca Mountain could be used to cycle and to get more energy out of this spent nuclear fuel. So, I mean, it's beyond me how a president, by executive order, can stop the will of Congress. And maybe we ought to talk about that in regard to things like the Keystone Energy Pipeline and expand this discussion a little further. I'll yield back to my colleague.
Again, I thank my friend from Georgia for helping out on the special order and just addressing the issue of recycling. What do we do? Because those of us who followed the nuclear fuel cycle, most people want it closed. And how do you get it closed? You get it closed by getting as much energy out of the fuel rods as you can. You do that by reprocessing, but it would make sense that if there was someone who's going to attempt to do that, that the nuclear fuel would be close by. There's probably some discussions about if we were going to have a reprocessing facility sometime in this country, like France, where would you locate it? Where would it be situated? I mean, I'm just a layman in this debate, but I think you would want it close by where the nuclear material is, the material that you want to use to reprocess to create fuel. So I can't speak for the entire body. I do know that the House spoke on Yucca Mountain and bringing a finality to this through a 297 vote. 297 members voted to ensure that we had the final dollars to do the final scientific study to move this process forward. And in that debate, it just showed that the will of the House was supportive. And this is a bipartisan. I mean, we don't have 297 or whatever the number is members who are just Republicans. We have 242. That means we brought a lot of our colleagues on the other side on this debate. Some of those really believe that the future is reprocessing and that we ought to be exploring that, and it's much better to have them located where you can recover that material. If my colleague from Georgia wouldn't mind, I see we're also joined by another colleague from Illinois. People wonder why we take up this cause. It's because we're a big nuclear state. That is about 50% of our electricity generation. I do a lot of coal. Coal is very important to me, but we are a nuclear power state, which means we have a lot of sites, a lot of reactors, and we have a lot of nuclear waste. So I'd like to yield some time to my colleague and thank you for coming down.
Well, I thank my colleague from Illinois, and I just want to say thank you for your leadership on this issue, among many other things. And this is an issue that's very important. It's important not just for the country. It's important for my state. It's important for my district. The 11th district in Illinois, it's kind of north-central Illinois. It's a beautiful place. Come spend money there sometime. But we have 3 nuclear power plants there. And in fact, at each nuclear power plant, of course, there is stored nuclear waste on site. And then we also have an area which was intended to be early on the original site of what was going to be nuclear reprocessing in this country. And now it is really just a pool with stored nuclear waste in it. So in one district, I think there's 131 locations across the country where we're storing this nuclear waste. And in my district alone, we have 4 of those. So this is an issue that's very important, not just to the people of Illinois, to the people of the 11th district, and mainly to the people of this country. I mean, Yucca Mountain the fund was created for this sole purpose of finding a place, a safe alternative to store nuclear waste. Now, going back to the very beginning part of the debate is why do we need nuclear power? And I think we've addressed that. And I think, you know, most Americans are on board with the understanding that it is good, clean power, provides a lot of great jobs. I mean, I've toured some of the plants in my district, and I can tell you they are good, high-paying American jobs. They take us on that road to energy independence. So understanding then that we need nuclear power, understanding that nuclear power plays an important role, we have to talk about the unfortunate side of it, which is the storage. This Yucca Mountain has been, or is being created until it was zeroed out, for the purpose of storing all this waste. And it just makes sense. You know, regardless of whether we build the nuclear reactors or reprocess them, we have to store this somewhere. Now, here's the question, though. If Yucca Mountain is technologically unable to store this fuel, then I would think the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, needs to come out and tell us, oh, it's technologically insufficient, and show us why. But they're not doing that, because the truth is it is technologically almost perfect, probably, as far as something like this would go. But the chairman of the NRC has turned this into not necessarily what's the right thing to do for the industry, what's the right thing to do for the country, but what's the political thing to do, and turn the commission into a political commission. When you talk about this, when you talk about what the safety is of our country, I think for something very basic like this, and I think very evident, I think we should take politics out of that. And I would think all my colleagues joining me today would agree that this doesn't need to be a political issue. We need to have the NRC free of the political manipulations, and only President Obama, frankly, can determine the fate of the chairman, and I hope he really takes that into account. I hope he takes into account what's the right thing to do for this country in the long run. So on top of that, look, we've got great jobs here. We have a need for nuclear power. Let's just complete the puzzle. Let's complete the puzzle, and let's put this stuff at Yucca Mountain.
If my colleague would continue to discuss this for a few minutes, you mentioned a fund in your kind of opening statements. Can you, for the benefit of the speaker, kind of explain where this fund come from and who's paying into it and what's it designed to do and really what's going on with it right now?
Well, look, if you pay for any kind of nuclear power, ratepayers pay for this fund.
So you have constituents who have been paying into this fund for
a long time, 25 years.
And
you know, and beyond that, let me add this on top of it. For every year that we delay opening, I mean, Yucca Mountain's not going away. It doesn't disappear off the face of the earth. For every year we delay, it's costing us $500 million more in what it's ultimately going to cost. So, look, my constituents, your constituents, anybody that uses any aspect of nuclear power, which is almost everybody, has been paying for this. This isn't some giant expenditure we're going to have to make out of the general fund when we don't have any money. This is already being funded. It's already being paid for. It only makes sense. And I think the colleagues that are joining me here today will say the same thing. This just makes sense.
And part of this debate has about the nuclear waste and where it's stored in the nuclear waste fund has been litigated in federal court. And the courts have said it is the responsibility of the national government to take this waste as part of the law, complying with the law. Obviously, we have no place to take it to. So we end up having the utilities store the high level of nuclear waste on site, and some of them, some have not asked us yet, some of them we are actually paying them to hold the waste that we're supposed to be holding.
And you know, and if my colleague wouldn't mind, I'll just say, you mentioned it just a few minutes ago, this idea passed this body with a large majority. That, to me, seems like this is the will of the American people. It's not just some agenda or just some crazy pie-in-the-sky idea. This is the will of the American people. And it's the responsibility of us to ensure that we're being safe. I mean, it just seems very basic to me. And so I'm having a hard time figuring out how and why politics has come into play to this. I mean, I think this is a debate we solved decades ago. But nonetheless, out in Washington, D.C., nothing surprises me in the 10 months I've been out here.
The gentleman would yield to me through the gentleman from Illinois, the subcommittee chair. Yeah, gentleman from the 11th of Illinois, let the gentleman from the 11th of Georgia be somewhat instructive in regard to the politics, because that's pure and simple what it is. And of course, comments were made in regard to the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But the fact is, it's the Secretary of Energy. It's the Secretary of Energy. This Secretary of Energy, a Nobel laureate in nuclear physics, who was essentially told by this administration to tell the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that he was requesting that the license application for Yucca Mountain be withdrawn from the NRC, taken out of their hands, the licensing process stopped with prejudice. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but if there are any lawyers in the body, they understand when you withdraw something with prejudice, that means you can't bring it back up. So this $14 billion has been taken out of the ratepayers from the 50 states, or at least where these 103 reactors exist. They're paying for this. And yet this political pressure on a gentleman who's got to be much, much smarter than any of us, Nobel laureate in nuclear physics. If I were him, as soon as that word came down to me and I got the memo from the White House, I would immediately resign over righteous indignation. And I yield back.
Well, if I could just say quickly on that point, I think it's Abby or Abi Mosini, Acting Director for Licensing and Inspections at the NRC, made this remark. Some senior managers contributed to the manipulation of the budget process and information to apparently make sure that the Yucca Mountain project would be left unfunded even if the license application was still before the NRC. We were unprepared for the political pressure and manipulations of our scientific and licensing processes that would come with the appointment of the chairman in 2009.
But fortunately, if I might interject, the board of the NRC rejected that. Rejected what he recommended.
Well, and I would just, reclaiming my time, would kind of close this circle, Mr. Speaker, reminding folks that the chairman of the NRC, Mr. Yasko, used to work for now Majority Leader in the Senate, Harry Reid. And it's the Majority Leader in the Senate that is blocking the funding for the final scientific analysis, and it is the chairman of the NRC, who used to work for the Majority Leader, who is complicit in this plan to shut down an investment of this country of $14.5 billion to comply with federal law that we passed in 1982. Now, in 1982, I was serving my country as an Army lieutenant in West Germany before the wall came down. That is a long time ago. This has been the policy of this country for decades. And to have one man, one majority leader of the Senate, to put a halt to that, that's why we're down here. Because he has raised this to a political debate, not a scientific debate. And because it's a political debate, what I'm attempting to do over a series of weeks is go around the country and just identify where is high-level nuclear waste stored. And would it be better for that waste to be stored underneath a mountain in a desert? The most investigated piece of property on the history of this earth. There is no piece of property that has been more studied than Yucca Mountain anywhere on the face of this earth. So that's why I have, and this is, I know this is hard for some folks to see, we're doing a tally as we go around the country to look at where are the votes? Where are the votes? And we have 27 people, as bipartisan, who have said this is where it should go. From Washington State, of course, Illinois, Wisconsin, Georgia, South Carolina, Arizona, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Maine, Vermont, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. We have new senators who have not had an opportunity to publicly either make a statement on it or cast a vote. They're in the middle. 27 yes, 8 really unknown. We're going to give them the credit of the doubt. From Merkley, Feinstein was a no, but Fukushima Daiichi and the 2 nuclear power plants that are on the Pacific Ocean in California and the high-level nuclear waste that's stored in ponds have her in a quandary based upon the representation of that state. Tester in Montana, unknown. Lee of Utah, Brown, Massachusetts, Ayotte, New Hampshire, Sheehan, New Hampshire, Wicker of Mississippi. Bona fide no's. Reed of Nevada, Heller of Nevada, Cantwell of Washington, Boxer of California, Baucus of Montana, Kerry of Massachusetts, Sanders of Vermont. So it's a chance to use the bully pulpit, my position as chairman of the subcommittee, to help educate not only the floor, my colleagues, the speaker, those who are following us, that there's got to be a better way to store high-level nuclear waste than in pools next to Lake Michigan, next to the Savannah River, next to the Pacific Ocean. Surely there's a better place, and we know there is. 30 years of study and research, federal law says Yucca Mountain in the desert underneath the mountain is probably as good a place as you're going to find, at least in the United States.
Well, and if the gentleman would grant me just a moment, I think when you said there's a mountain in the desert, or there's, I think, 131 locations